Picture this. It's the 1600s and you're seated at a grand oak table in a candlelit hall somewhere in Europe, perhaps London, Paris, or Vienna. The air hums with the clink of goblets and the murmur of aristocratic chatter. The host, a nobleman with a penchant for theatrics, signals for the main course. Servants glide in, bearing silver trays, and with a flourish, they unveil a dish of finely ground powder, dark and faintly shimmering under the flickering light. You lean closer, expecting some exotic spice, but a whisper ripples through the guests. This is mummy, the ground remains of an ancient Egyptian, served not as a curiosity, but as medicine, a delicacy, a status symbol. Spoons dip into the powder with reverence, as if it's the finest saffron. You blink, certain you've misheard, but the scene unfolds with chilling normalcy. They're eating it. Willingly. And this, my friends, is no fever dream. It's history, one of the strangest, darkest chapters Europe ever wrote. I know what you're thinking. How could anyone, let alone the cultured elites of Renaissance Europe, consume human remains? The truth is wilder than any fiction, a story tucked away in the shadows of history books, rarely whispered in classrooms. For centuries, from the 12th to the 18th century, Europeans didn't just collect mummies. They ate them, traded them, and wove them into the very fabric of their society. This wasn't a secret cult. It was mainstream, endorsed by physicians, prescribed in medical texts, and celebrated at lavish banquets. We're about to dive into a world where sacred Egyptian relics became commodities, where tombs were plundered to feed a medical fad, and where the line between civilization and barbarity blurred in ways that will leave you stunned. So, settle in, because this tale is as unsettling as it is mesmerizing. Let's step back to the Renaissance, that dazzling era of art, exploration, and insatiable curiosity. Europe in the 1500s was a place alive with wonder. Explorers returned from distant lands, with tales of creatures and cultures that seemed ripped from myth. But nothing gripped the European imagination quite like ancient Egypt. To them, Egypt was more than a place. It was a cipher for eternity, a civilization that seemed to have cracked the code of death itself. Mummies, those perfectly preserved bodies, wrapped in linen and mystery, were the ultimate treasure. If you were a noble, a scholar, or just someone with enough coin and ambition, you needed Egyptian artifacts in your collection. A statue here, a scarab there, but above all, a mummy, or at least a fragment of one. These weren't mere corpses. They were emblems of power, conversation pieces, and most bizarrely, potential miracle cures. Stroll through the bustling streets of 16th century London or Paris, and you'd see it for yourself. Past the clamor of merchants hawking silks from China or spices from India, you'd spot a shop window displaying an ancient Egyptian mummy, propped up like a mannequin, its darkened face staring blankly at the crowd. These weren't hidden in back rooms. They were showcased, advertised as luxury goods. Trade routes from Egypt to Europe buzzed with activity, not just ferrying goods but entire preserved bodies, shipped across the Mediterranean like barrels of wine. Mummies were so coveted that merchants haggled over their age or supposed royal lineage, boasting as if they were selling fine art. Owning a mummy was a flex, a way to say, I hold a piece of eternity in my hands. But this wasn't just about collecting dust-covered relics. The obsession ran deeper, darker. The European elite didn't merely want to own mummies, they wanted to use them. Apothecaries, those early pharmacists, stocked mummy parts alongside herbs and tinctures. You could walk into a shop in Florence or Amsterdam and ask for prepared mummy, and they'd hand you a vial of ground human remains, no questions asked. Artists joined the fray, using a pigment called mummy brown. Yes, made from actual mummies, To paint portraits and landscapes, its grim origins lending a morbid thrill. Even Shakespeare, the bard himself, slipped mummy into his plays as a medicinal reference. This wasn't a fringe movement. It was high culture, etched into the heart of European life. How did this madness begin? The answer lies in a misunderstanding so colossal, it would make any historian wince. It starts with a substance called mumia, a black, tar-like material praised in ancient Arabic medical texts for its healing powers. European scholars, eager to tap into this exotic wisdom, saw the dark, glossy coating on Egyptian mummies and jumped to a catastrophic conclusion. Surely this was mumia. In truth, the Egyptians used natron salt and plant resins for preservation, not bitumen. But facts were no match for fervor. The Europeans clung to the idea that mummies were steeped in this magical substance. And from there, a wild theory took root. If mummies could endure thousands of years, consuming them might grant some of that preservation to the living. This wasn't a passing fancy. It was grounded in a medical philosophy called sympathetic medicine, the notion that like could cure like. A preserved body, they reasoned, could preserve a living one. It was as if eating a mummy was swallowing an elixir of immortality. And this wasn't the work of back-alley charlatans. The biggest names in medicine were all in. The personal physician to Francis I of France prescribed mummy powder. King Charles II of England concocted King's Drops, a brew of mummy extract and human skull. Even Francis Bacon, the champion of reason, extolled mummy medicine. They claimed it could cure everything: headaches, bruises, broken bones, epilepsy, plague, you name it. Mummy powder was stirred into pills, dissolved in wine, or slathered on wounds as a plaster. There was even mummy wine, a grotesque cocktail of fermented grapes and human remains. The scope of this practice is staggering. For centuries, medical textbooks listed mummy preparations as standard remedies. You could stroll into any European pharmacy and buy mummy powder as easily as you'd grab aspirin today. It wasn't cheap. Mummies were a luxury, their price reflecting their rarity. But the demand was ravenous, and it birthed one of history's most bizarre supply chains. Egyptian tombs, once sacred sanctuaries, became gold mines. Grave robbers swarmed burial sites, hauling out mummies by the dozens in a single night. These weren't careful excavations, they were frenzied looting sprees. Merchants packed the mummies onto ships, often snapping them into pieces to cram more into their crates. Imagine the horror. Ancient bodies, lovingly prepared for the afterlife, shattered and stuffed into barrels like mere cargo. The story grows darker as we follow those ships across the Mediterranean. Demand for mummies was so insatiable that supply couldn't keep up. Merchants, ever resourceful, began to improvise. When ancient mummies ran scarce, they turned to fresher sources. Hospitals and execution grounds became grim suppliers, providing corpses that were treated with bitumen and spices, wrapped in linen, and passed off as authentic Egyptian mummies. The market was so lucrative, it drew in all sorts: grave robbers, traders, even pharmacists who set up mummy-grinding stations in their shops. Picture it. You'd pick your mummy, watch it get pulverized into dust, and take home a fresh batch of powder, like ordering coffee ground to order. It was a grotesque marriage of commerce and desecration, and it was all perfectly legal. The scale is almost unimaginable. We're talking thousands of mummies, hundreds of thousands by some estimates, dug up, shipped, and consumed. Entire tombs were emptied to sate Europe's hunger. And it wasn't just about medicine. The elite took it further, turning mummies into a spectacle of their social lives. Imagine a high society banquet in 1680s France. The table groans under the weight of delicacies, but the centerpiece is mummy meat, flesh meticulously extracted from ancient remains, seasoned and served like a rare delicacy. Guests sip wine laced with mummy powder, nibble bread baked with ground mummy, and sweeten their drinks with mummy-infused sugar. It was a macabre farm-to-table movement, except the farm was a tomb, and the table was set with human remains. These weren't rare events. The aristocracy threw mummy unwrapping parties, gathering to peel away a mummy's linen wrappings, revealing the preserved body inside. It was like an unboxing video, but instead of a gadget, it was a 3,000-year-old person. Others hosted mummy painting parties, where artists used mummy brown to create portraits, the pigment's grim origins adding a morbid allure. These gatherings weren't shocking or taboo. They were fashionable, a way to flaunt wealth and worldliness. Hosts would boast about their mummy's vintage, claiming it came from a pharaoh or high priest, though most were likely commoners or fakes. What's truly staggering is how normalized this was. European nobility didn't see mummies as human remains. They saw them as exotic commodities like saffron or silk. They'd casually swap recipes for preparing mummy meat, as if discussing a Sunday roast. Some doctors even prescribed specific mummy parts for ailments: head for headaches, heart for cardiac issues, feet for foot pain. The wealthy could special order these cuts, while the middle class settled for generic mummy powder, often spiked with spices to mask its origins. Not everyone was blind to the horror. In the 12th century, an Arabic physician, Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi, visited Egypt and was appalled to learn Europeans were eating mummies. He called it barbaric, unworthy of civilized people. His voice was a rare beacon of sanity in a world intoxicated by mummy medicine. Yet the practice thrived, propped up by tradition, authority, and a profound ignorance of ancient Egyptian culture. The banquet halls of Europe fade from view as we trace the unraveling of this grim tradition. It didn't end with a sudden awakening. The decline began in the 1700s, when tomb raiders, perhaps emboldened by greed, started admitting their ancient mummies were often recent corpses, dressed up to deceive buyers. Nothing shatters a luxury market like learning you've been dining on executed criminals instead of pharaohs. Then came the rise of scientific inquiry. Doctors, in a radical move, began testing remedies and, shockingly, found no evidence that mummy powder cured anything beyond an appetite for the macabre. But the true turning point was a shift in Europe's gaze toward ancient Egypt. As scholars deciphered hieroglyphs and unearthed the stories of Egyptian beliefs, a realization dawned. These mummies were people, individuals with names, families, and hopes for the afterlife. The same social circles that once savored mummy meat began to recoil at the practice, labeling it barbaric. By the late 1800s, eating mummies had fallen into disgrace. Museums began collecting and preserving them, and new laws safeguarded human remains. But the toll was staggering. Countless mummies, irreplaceable fragments of history, had been destroyed, ground into dust, and consumed. This wasn't a mere quirk of history. It was a cultural catastrophe, a testament to what happens when reverence is overtaken by greed. How could a continent, home to the era's brightest minds, fall for such a delusion? They weren't monsters. They were people, acting on the knowledge they had, however flawed. It's easy to mock their folly, but it's also a mirror. How many of our own truths will future generations ridicule? The next time you reach for a trendy supplement or a miracle cure, think of those Europeans, spooning mummy powder into their mouths, convinced it held the key to life. History doesn't just recount the past, It challenges us to question ourselves. What did you make of this wild, unsettling story? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did you know about Europe's mummy-eating craze? Or is this as shocking to you as it was to me? If you enjoyed diving into this hidden corner of history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next journey into the strange and forgotten. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.